Okay, hey Marissa.
Testing.
We're not testing. We're just.
Oh, we're already live? This is happening?
Yeah, we're recording. Okay.
Oh, okay. Hello.
Hi. So I'm gonna ask you some flashcard questions based on this Korean TV show
Okay.
called Reply 1997. So you just answer based on like what you would do if you were this person. Okay.
Do I have to imagine that person in 1990? I haven't seen Reply 1997.
Yeah. You don't have to know anything about it.
Okay, so as if I was which person? Myself or another person? Because I can be a character.
You don't have to be a character. You don't have to be a character. Like, what would Marissa do if
Okay.
she were in these shoes?
Okay, if I was Marissa. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say you're a 17-year-old girl in high school in Korea. You're a student. You're obsessed with this band called h.o.t. And you're, like, obsessed with them. You have, like, all their posters. You're obsessed.
Of course.
And,
Yeah.
So you're, like, obsessed with them. And, you go out to their concerts and stuff. You go and, like, stalk their houses and shit. So you come home very late, and then your dad is yelling at you, and you keep fighting with him, and then eventually he gets fed up with you, so he cuts all of your hair off. What do you do?
Okay, first of all, my dad wasn't around when I was growing up, but if he did, he cuts off all my hair? Oh, single tear. Single tear. That would totally be the appropriate use of a single tear. Single tear, and then, okay, it's still recording. Then I would go to my room and I might write a poem in my diary, and maybe I would write a letter to h.o.t. and be like, h.o.t, save me from this patriarchal bullshit.
Okay, very good answer. All right, I like that. All right, let's say you and your best friend are obsessed with the band h.o.t, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then one day you find out that your best friend is actually listening to your favorite band's rival band. And she has like posters of their stuff all over her room and stuff. And you feel really betrayed. What do you do?
Oh, I feel betrayed. Well, you're telling me I'd feel betrayed, because me as a person, I wouldn't feel betrayed. I'd be like, you know what? This is a good opportunity for me to have more h.o.t time to myself. Then I wouldn't have any competition for my friend, and then I could be the like hirsute, like the biggest fan of h.o.t. I wouldn't have any competition, right? But if I felt betrayed, I'd be like, I guess we're not friends anymore. h.o.t is the only group of people who is going to support me in life.
Okay.
And if she left me like that, that would just further confirm that this world is meaningless bullshit.
All right.
Except for h.o.t.
Except for them. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's say okay, you're not this girl anymore. You're a 17-year-old boy now, okay?
Okay.
You actually like the 17-year-old girl.
Is that,
That's how 17-year-old
it's more
boys
like-
sound like. Yeah.
it's like a little more internalized. Right?
So,
It's like a boner in my pants that I can't share with anyone. It's like, it's there.
yeah. So okay, so you as this 17-year-old boy, you have a crush on this 17-year-old girl. But then one day you find out that your older brother also has a crush on her. What do you do?
How much older is he? That fucker.
Like almost 10 years older.
Oh, shit. Oh, okay. It depends if I'm an alpha or a beta. Am I a middle child or am I the second?
You're the second.
Do I have a younger sibling? Ooh, appa. I might just be like, you know what? He is better looking. He is going to know what to do with all that, and I'm not ready. But, I might let him go for it, and I'd watch and I'd try to learn, but secretly inside I would be broken knowing that, I'd be like, I have taste, and I have taste because if my brother likes her and I like her, then I'm going in the right direction. But at the same time, secretly, I would never forgive him. I would let him have her, for sure, but I would never forgive him, ever. To the grave.
Okay, that's intense. Okay, thank you. I love that answer. Final question. You're that 17-year-old girl again, okay? You go to your car, you open the back seat, and out pops your mom and dad because they were fucking. What do you do?
Oh! I have a car? And they fucked in it? I'd be so mad. Because you know how much work I would have had to put to fucking get that car? I would be so mad. I'm like, you fucking have a car. You didn't help me get this car, and now you want to fuck in my car? First of all, you all haven't been talking in a long time, and now you're coming out here trying to start some shit, trying to make some siblings. I would be upset. But you know what? There's a part of me that's well, if I was this girl, I probably wouldn't be as capitalistic as Marissa, but Marissa would have been like, y'all owe me some gifts. But if I was this girl who was obsessed with h.o.t, I would probably back away, close the hatchback, back away, because it's a hatchback for sure, and I walk away and I go by myself, like one of those yogurt drinks at one of the the late night stores, and I talk to the guy who's like kind of creepy and maybe has a couple pimples. He's like maybe like 30 but has like adult acne. And I talk to him and he's secretly into me, but I don't know what to do because I just saw my parents fucking. And in the end he gives me the Yakult or the probiotic drink or maybe the banana milk for free. And I'm like, oh shit. And momentarily I'm distracted from the fact that I just saw my parents fucking by the fact that I got a free banana milk. And then I return to my existential dread.
Thank you, Marissa.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Totally.
Welcome to K-Drama School. I'm your host, Grace Jung, and class is now in session. Discuss a show called Reply 1997. It is written by Yi Woo-jung and directed by Shin Won-ho. And they collaborated on the other two Reply shows, Reply 1994 and Reply 1998. Reply 1997 came out in 2012 on TVN, and that was during a time when people did not have that high of an expectation for this show because it was on cable. And in 2012, Korean cable ratings didn't really matter too much. Like, they were not breaking enormous records at the time. But after the success of this show, it turned a lot more heads and their attention towards cable, both from the industry and with viewers at home. The show is written by writer Yi Woo-jung, who started out as a variety show writer. She wrote for some very well-known, legendary Korean variety TV shows like Heroine 6, which was a comedy variety show that aired from 2004 to 2006, featuring 6 female comedians. Some of them were more like actors or singers, but for the most part, they were comedians, and it was a hilarious show. It was amazing. Lee also wrote for 2 Days, 1 Night, or 1박 2일, which was on KBS. She wrote for season 1, which is the original sort of like groundbreaking series at the time that aired from 2007 to 2012, and it featured some big names at the time like Kang Ho-dong, Eun Ji-won, Lee Soo-geun, Kim Jong-min, and that show eventually went through multiple revamps and recastings. And in Korea, what they do is whenever they revamp a show by recasting people, they call it a new season, like season 2 or season 3, season 4. So because of some scandals associated with Kang Ho-dong, which was for tax fraud or tax evasion, and Lee Soo-geun, which was for gambling. Like I said, gambling in South Korea is illegal. And then much later, there was a sexual assault case linked to Chung Jun-young, which if you follow K-pop news, you would know this very well. So they had to sort of cancel the show and then revamp it with new cast members. Yoo-jung wrote on other very successful variety shows like Qualifications of Men and Grandpas Over Flowers. The format for Grandpas Over Flowers got picked up by NBC in 2016, and that was remade into a show called Better Late Than Never for American audiences. And that was conceptually the same thing. It's about a group of old male celebrities who travel and bicker throughout the whole journey. And Will Shatner and Henry Winkler were on that show, and it lasted 2 seasons on NBC. Yoo-jung wrote a couple other shows you'll recognize that are currently on Netflix, at least in the U.S. territories. The first is called Prison Playbook, and the other is called Hospital Playlist. Yoo-jung's shows always get their time context from music. So whatever music was popular in that era, that contemporary period that she's writing from, like, music sets the tone. But unfortunately, in the U.S., this is U.S. territories only. I don't know about other countries, but the Reply series is also on Netflix currently. And Netflix did this horrific thing where they removed all the music cues, the original music cues that were made in the Korean production. So the intertext of the music that indicates, like, in terms of timeline, like, oh, this is from 1997 or 1998 or the year 2000, like, music is the big indicator, and Netflix removed all of it. And I don't know whether to blame Netflix for this. I don't know whether to blame Cocoa for this. Regardless, that is unacceptable, okay, to do that, especially if it's a series where the music plays a major role. I mean, music is like a whole nother character in the Reply series, and to remove them or replace them with bullshit other kinds of sounds that's criminal. I mean, it's really fucked up. All right. I mean, you're ruining the show. You might as well not even make those shows available in these territories if you're going to go and do that. So I say boo to Netflix and boo to Cocoa for making that horrendous and heinous mistake. If you can't get the music clearances for these shows, then don't bother distributing them because you're not doing it justice. You're being irresponsible with these shows. So that's my soapbox moment there. Prison Playbook was slightly different in that Yoo Jung was credited as the creator and not necessarily the writer of that show, so music didn't play too large of a role in that show, even though it's called Prison Playbook. But in all three of the Reply series and in Hospital Playlist, you'll notice that the characters are very influenced by the popular songs of that era. I love the Reply series because while the shows do not have seasons, they do feature recurring cast members and share intertexts with overlapping storylines in every single show. The parental figures played by Sung Dong-il and Lee Il-hwa are in all three of the shows, and they use their actual names, Sung Dong-il and Lee Il-hwa. And while the children are played by different actors and they all have different characters, these parental figures remain consistent on all three of the shows. So Sung Dong-il actually plays a doppelganger in Reply 1994 of himself from the earlier show that he was in. So it's just these like weird sort of wacky gimmicks, and I attribute that boldness to Yoo Jung's variety show writing days, because Korean variety TV is all about weirdness, and the weirder it is, the funnier it is, and the more memorable it is. Reply 1997 follows a group of high school kids. Jung Eunji, or Eunji from the girl group A-Pink, is the female protagonist on the show. She appears alongside Seo In-guk, Hoya from Infinite, Shin So-yul, and Eun-ji-won, and Lee Si-yeon. Reply 1997 has a closeted gay character named Junhee, played by Hoya, and he's a very introverted character. He's in love with Yoonjae, who is the male protagonist on the show. And although Yoonjae eventually ends up with Siwon, Siwon knows about Junhee's queer identity and is very respectful of it and supportive. And while the show's narrative was very hush-hush about Junhee's gay identity, I still liked that a gay character was on this show, right? At the very least, there was an appearance. And you get another queer character in Reply 1994, but his queer identity is greatly muted. It's greatly suppressed. Even more so than it was in Reply 1997. So I don't know why that kind of choice was made. It might have something to do with producers and the great popularity that these series was getting. So either way, I didn't think that was too cool. But these are small steps forward, so they can be recognized at the very least. The show's protagonist, Siwon, is obsessed with the boy band h.o.t. And for those of you who know h.o.t, congratulations, you're old as fuck. If you don't know who h.o.t is, you should probably gain some awareness of the group, because they are the first generation K-pop boy band that marks the early era of boy groups in K-pop Hallyu explosion of the 1990s. And because of that, you have cameo appearances from Moon Hee-jun and Tony An. They're both h.o.t members. And I also love that the female comedians were on the show. Like female comedians like An Young-mi and Shin Bong-sun, you know, they make cameo appearances. You also have a cameo appearance from Shin Dong-yup, who is a comedian and MC. He's an actor, and he was a big part of 1990s Korean television. So the show has a lot of that late 1990s pop element. It's like it's a very loud and clear shout out to those markers from that era. Shiwon's obsessed with s.e.s as well. If you know s.e.s, you also know h.o.t. I mean, if you know s.e.s, you probably sing s.e.s songs at 노래방 when you go there. All the millennials who grew up around that era, they know s.e.s and they will sing s.e.s songs at 노래방. I thought it was really cute how the female characters on Reply 1997 would style their hair like Pada from s.e.s with the white pom pom hair ties and the three strands of hair that fell on her face. Is so cute. And then also this rivalry between s.e.s fans and Finkel fans, or the rivalry between h.o.t fans and Jex Kiss fans, right? Eun Ji-won making this appearance on the show has this meta quality because he was a part of Chex Kiss and a major part of 1990s Korean media, and he's like on the show watching TV with these younger kids who are playing basically the same age, like they're all playing high school students, and they're watching Eun Ji-won on television or in movies, and Eun Ji-won's sitting there just playing a different character. It's just so weird and interesting. I loved Ji-won's character because she's so ordinary and yet very unique. I found her to be extremely relatable because she's not the smartest in her school. She's not um, like the most gorgeous person in her group either. In fact, that's an ongoing joke. A lot of the men make fun of her very plain look. But she's hilarious and she's loud, she's assertive, she's passionate, she knows what she wants, she goes after it. And I find that admirable. And then eventually she grows up and becomes this variety show TV writer, which I guess is somewhat autobiographical of the show creator. I love that this show is set in Busan. Eunji has a very real Busan dialect, right? The southern Gyeongsang province dialect, and she brings it out and executes it beautifully on the show. Seo In-guk does the same. He grew up in Ulsan, so he has this great Gyeongsangnam-do dialect, and that to me is it makes me feel at home because I grew up with that Gyeongsangdo dialect. My dad is from Gosong, my mom is from Hapcheon. I was born in Busan, so I definitely recognize that dialect, and when I hear it on television, it makes me feel at home. Anyway, I thought it was very admirable to have this kind of heroine on TV where like looks and brains don't matter at all. I think that's a noble message because the reality is those things don't really matter. Unfortunately, those kinds of elements started to slip away from the scripts in the other two series, because they casted very beautiful and skinny women as the protagonists on those shows. But I liked that Reply 1997 didn't really emphasize those aspects about femininity. And it was because of the success of Reply 1997 that we have Reply 1994 and Reply 1988, each of which got better and better in terms of storytelling and production. All three shows have similar themes, though. One big consistent theme is that whoever the female protagonist ends up marrying remains a mystery man until almost the last episode. And this is because with each show, there's usually just two girls and then like four boys. In Reply 1988, it was different. It was one girl. Oh, wait, no, I guess there were two girls because Haiti's character has a sister, but for the most part, it was just like two girlfriends and then four boys. And it was always like, who's going to end up with who? Like that kind of thing. But, honestly, I just find this whole like notion of making marriage the win, marriage as the end game, to be a bit of a shitty thing. Like, I think it would be way more radical to have your female protagonist be a single woman in the end. I want more Korean dramas try and do this. I want to see more movies and TV shows in Hollywood do this. Because marriage isn't always a win. Marriage is also a huge compromise in many ways, and producers never frame it as that. They always make singlehood appear like a compromise in life, and I disagree with that. I find singlehood to be incredibly liberating. So stop ending women's narrative on marriage. How about that? Like, why not end female protagonists' narratives with freedom or divorce or just satisfied to be single, you know? Like why can't we have that? You know, we have heroes in Mad Men and in Breaking Bad, like they end up single, you know, divorced and dejected, but they're still heroes, right? Anti-heroes. And I don't think a woman's singlehood should even be antagonized as like an anti-hero quality. It should just be like, oh, this is a win. Today's guest is Julayne Lee. She is a Korean American poet based in San Francisco. Her book is entitled Not Your White Savior. She is also an adoptee who grew up with a white family in the Midwest, and a lot of her experiences as such are in her book, which is amazing. And I can't think of a better way to bookend the last day of AAPI Heritage Month than to have this conversation with Julayne. So, what a treat. Let's talk to Julayne. Wow, so 3 years. Goodness.
Yeah.
You moved up there for work, I suppose?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay. Hmm. And how's it been? Did you live in San Francisco before, or was that like a new thing?
No, so when we met,
Yeah.
I was living in Long Beach. So I lived in Long Beach for
Yeah.
5 years. I moved there from Minnesota, where I grew up.
Right.
And so then I moved up to the Bay Area for a job, which I
Mm-hmm.
actually just left and started a new job.
Okay.
And then, no, I had never lived in the Bay Area before. I wasn't looking for a job. I was not trying to move, that's for sure. I was pretty happy in Long Beach.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the opportunity worked out, and I'm glad it did because I'm pretty happy up here too. I miss LA. I miss Long Beach
Yeah.
for sure, but
Yeah.
no, it's been a good change, and I just started a new job this month, and that's been good too. So
Congratulations. Is that the teaching job you mentioned?
no, so I left teaching a while ago.
Okay.
Um, Now I'm working for Stanford Children's Health
Oh,
as
wow.
a senior data analyst in human resources.
Okay.
And yeah, I just finishing up my third week now.
Oh,
And
wow.
they, a lot of times when I've worked different places, it's like, oh, bring your whole self to work and we care about you and everything. And, but there's also, I feel like, kind of some unspoken rules about just kind of leave certain things at the door.
Yeah.
And, the um, the trial for Derek Chauvin was going on, and the verdict came in this week. And our HR leader, our chief HR officer, she sent an email like Tuesday afternoon and said the verdict is in. It hadn't. We didn't know yet what it was, but they knew that it was going to be read that afternoon.
Right.
And she said we're going to create some time tomorrow afternoon for a healing circle. It's optional, but this has been a hard
Yeah.
time for a lot of people. So I just
Yeah.
appreciate that they you know, are willing to have, space for these conversations. And then
Mm-hmm.
yesterday they had another, I guess it's a monthly series, which is usually more focused around patient care, but then they used that time this month to talk again about, different people's experiences with, you know, how they're dealing with not just the pandemic, but also again this specific week because the verdict came out, and our HR leader again spoke, but also our CEO,
Mm-hmm.
and then another executive as well. So again, I just
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that they were like super transparent
Yeah.
about like what they've struggled with, and
Right.
and just that we need to have these conversations in order to really support each other. So
For
it's the first
sure.
time I've worked anywhere where they're just like,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about this. It's not about having the perfect conversation or having all the answers right now, but
Exactly.
it's about having the conversation.
Yes. Yes.
So
No, that's beautiful. And that's so like California in a way. That's so Bay Area in a way. Like, yeah, it's like very, progressive. Um, and like I don't know if it's of the times or I don't know if it's specific to the local culture, but I would say it's a mix of both, but 80% of it is kind of that Bay Area vibe, that particular kind of Bay Area progressivism that I note. Like, because, like I grew up in New York, but I and New York's a very liberal place. However, um, I still, like up until 6 months ago, back in New York when I was visiting, there were still people who were very resistant, and I'm talking about liberal progressives, right? They were
Hmm.
very resistant to concepts like they, them, theirs, and non-gender
Oh,
binary. Yeah, yeah.
oh
And I was just
wow.
like, why? Why are you against that? And they were just like, it's ridiculous. Like, I don't get it. It's like a gender is, self explanatory. I was like, but it's
But
not
it's not.
always. And
No,
that
no.
is why this concept exists, right?
Yeah.
So, in with certain regard, I would say the Bay Area is a lot more progressive than New York in some aspects, and even the
Hmm.
whole weed culture too. Like,
Hmm.
just the fact that New York allowed it like literally like yesterday
Hmm. Yeah.
for
Yeah. Exactly.
recreational weed. It's so
Yeah.
like y'all are such squares. Y'all are so uptight, New York.
Who knows why? Yeah, I wonder why that is. But I
Mm.
mean, when you're talking about pronouns, because the previous employer I was at is a health tech startup, very small, and so
Mm-hmm.
just like how do you address diversity when you don't have like the affinity groups or the business resource groups, for Asian
Mm-hmm.
employees, Black employees, Latino employees, and so
Mm-hmm.
I had gone to a session around like diversity and
Yeah.
specifically LGBTQ. And I asked, I said, what do we do as a small organization?
Right.
And the speaker said, you can start by just in your LinkedIn profile, don't just put your name, put your pronouns, and put
Mm.
that in your email signature. And
There you go.
and I did. And when I was interviewing a candidate too, I tried to start by when I introduced myself, just say my pronouns too.
Right.
And I'll never forget there was one person who they said, when you introduced yourself and you shared your pronouns, that just meant so much to me. And I
Yeah.
was like, wow, you never know the power that that can have. And
Oh
I've
yeah.
noticed a few of my, new colleagues that like their
Right.
email signature will also, use their pronouns with a link to, more information around, the importance of using pronouns. And so I'm,
Yeah.
again, grateful that people are, you know, using, opportunities, as you know, mundane as your email
Mm-hmm.
signature, but as a
Mm-hmm.
way to kind of open up the conversation. It's not required that everybody do
Yes.
that, but
Mm-hmm.
again, it's an opportunity to educate people, and
Yeah.
um, you know,
Yeah.
hopefully others also feel more comfortable then too.
And that is how we normalize it, by integrating it into our day to day, right?
Hmm.
And not treating it like an event, but just it's part of our current daily life. And
Right.
yeah, I say that that is a huge incentive. If somebody in that space who feels marginalized senses comfort, liberation, understanding, and recognition, I mean, then why should we deny them of those feelings, right?
Right. Right.
Especially when they lead a marginal life.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I like that. And I know, like, what a diehard activist you are, like in so many facets, like I still remember when you invited me and some other local like LA Korean Americans to your, I think it was like a poetry reading, but it was like in conjunction with um, the April 19th as Haiku
Mm.
event, right?
Hmm.
Or is it April
Yes.
29th? The
Hmm.
I don't, I mean, it's wrong to call it riots, but
Right.
there was a social uprising, it was a civil
Right.
uprising in Los Angeles, um, which is problematically called the LA riots.
Hmm.
But, it was basically an event that brought together Korean Americans and Black Americans into one space. And there was this kind of like artistic expression
Hmm.
and sort of a union and gathering. And then afterwards, we all ate Korean food together. And I just remember you with your chopsticks and your bowl, like you brought your own utensils. And I was just like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. Like, nobody else has the guts to do this, but you do it, boldly, unapologetically. And you say, we just produce so much waste, you know? I just remember you saying that, you know, and even again, like you insert it everywhere. Like there was a like an elderly black man who was like asking me, well, how do I use chopsticks? And I was kind of like trying to teach him, and he kept saying,
Mhm.
okay honey, and you were like, she's not honey, she is a grown woman named
Uh,
Grace, okay?
yes,
And I was
yes.
just like, fucking Julayne.
Well, I hate that when people like, I mean, especially when you're in an intimate environment like that where,
Sure.
you know, it doesn't take much to learn someone's name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that whole
Mm-hmm.
event, another poet had asked me to, work on that with them, says grateful to, help create that space. And I think, we did originally call it, a commemoration of the LA riots. And
Right.
I was educated because people kind of pointed that out to me that, hey, why are you calling it riots? It should
Mm-hmm.
be, it was an uprising. Or
Right.
I asked, started asking some other poets. I was like, well, what would you call it? And they said it was a rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was an education for me to kind of
Yeah.
step back and see like how language really does,
Yes.
influence,
Mm-hmm.
our frame of thinking and so on.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but yeah, that was, I mean, I think we need to continue having more, spaces like that. It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
virtual or, you know, in person, hopefully again soon.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just realizing now, like, coincidentally, it's April and it's
Mm-hmm.
23rd. 6 days from
Mm-hmm.
now, it will be yet again another anniversary of that. Um, that let's call it an awakening. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
was a moment
Mm-hmm.
of reckoning that
Mm-hmm.
time. Um, yeah, and you know, I remember this was, I suppose, a teaching moment. Like I was a master's student at the time at UCLA, and we had just watched Spike Lee's "Do the Right Thing," um, which was, you know, I mean, it's a real film, right? Like that really does kind of portray some of that tension between the black community and Korean American greengrocers, but like I remember, you know, just kind of like I think I had posted a blog post in response to the readings because I was part of the assignment, the readings and the screening, and I had said like, oh, like you know, with the riots and blah blah blah, and then in class, like my professor, I don't know, I think it was an interesting teaching moment because she had put me on the spot by calling me out, which I don't agree with. Um, I don't think that is helpful in ensuring a safer environment for students in order to make sure that teaching and learning is productive and impactful. But
Mm-hmm.
it was a moment that I won't forget because she was like, well, Grace said some inflammatory things in the blog post by saying that these are a riot, that this is a
Wow.
riot, you know? And then I was just like, but it was a riot. Like they were breaking things and setting shit on fire. And then she was like, well, have you considered other words like uprising or rebellion?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I had not considered those words because nobody fucking told me about them, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
So like that was a very critical moment for me because while I agreed with her, right? And while I was learning something and I was, you know, kind of coming to an understanding, I
Mm-hmm.
did not agree with her method of
Right.
approach.
Right.
Um, and that's something I try to be hyper aware of when I'm teaching
Mm-hmm.
students because students, when they're young and they're in an institution where they're learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
They will make mistakes. They're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to make mistakes. That's the space where mistakes are allowed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to kind of guide them and correct them, but without making them feel attacked, right?
Right.
While
Right.
ensuring that safer environment. I think that is such a nuanced, like very nuanced and difficult thing to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like I try to be mindful of that at all times. Did you have like moments like that when you were teaching in the past at all?
Well, I think when I was teaching high school math back in Minnesota, gosh, this is so long ago.
Mm.
Um, I think my goal was always because I would have students come in, and this was high school, so I would have
Right.
students come in the first day of class. They'd be like, "I hate math." It's like, okay, that's okay. It's okay if you hate it.
Yes.
I'm not here to make you love it.
Right.
I'm here to help you
Yes.
feel confident in it and
Yeah.
to um, be able to get the credits you need to
Yeah.
graduate, and
Totally.
to not hate the class. Like,
Right.
like I don't want you to have anxiety coming in here every day. That was
Exactly.
my goal. And you don't all have to walk out of here getting A's. Like,
Exactly.
whatever. Do what you need to do, but you need to
Mhm.
feel empowered, and it's okay
Mhm.
to ask questions.
Mhm.
And I always had those students who like, well, I can do it all in my head. And I was like, well, I can't see in your head. And part of the grade is what you're putting on paper to show me how you got your answer.
Right.
And I remember one student, she, and her parents would come to conferences and they'd say, well, she's liking your class. She doesn't
Oh.
love math, but she likes your class. And then by the end of the
Yeah.
class, the term, she said, I don't love math, but I can do it and I like your class. And that to
Yeah.
me, that's better than any letter grade that somebody can ever get or any teacher evaluation. Because, that
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, what I've learned over time is that nobody comes into their first math class hating it, but they
Mhm.
have some kind of traumatic
Mhm.
experience, or maybe they
Mhm.
moved and were placed in the wrong level, and
Mhm.
then it just this domino effect because it's so like sequential that if you miss a certain topic or something, you're just
Right.
lost. So
Right.
I've heard that from friends and stuff too. It's like either they moved and got placed in the wrong class, or they had a
Yeah.
bad teacher, whatever
Yeah.
that means, bad teacher. But I,
Yeah.
I had a bad teacher, in college in a math class, and we were just
Right.
like barely surviving. Just
Right.
we would go to class and try and take notes, and then we'd have study group afterwards because we had to teach each other what we were supposed to have learned and prepare for the test. But yeah, I
Yeah.
don't I don't think shaming somebody in front of
Mhm.
everybody like that is
Mhm.
useful.
Mhm.
I mean, the teaching moment is there, but calling one student out
Yeah.
is not helpful.
No, not at all.
No, it doesn't.
And
Well, and it
yeah,
doesn't even for the other students. I don't think it helps them feel comfortable in asking questions or taking risks. So
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, all of that, I'm so on board with you. And yeah, that is such a win when somebody says like, I enjoyed this class, you know?
Hmm.
Because they're, even if, let's say, the goal of the class is, yeah, to learn math, but they're learning other things, right? They're learning
Hmm.
human interaction. They're learning humanity. I feel like that is
Hmm.
a way more important lesson than anything else, you know? And in my field, like, or in my area of study, which is part of like arts and humanities studies, like I don't know, right now, like I'm in the job market for academia, and like I'm writing all these like teaching statements and all this blah blah blah, all this shit. And I always write like, I feel like college is a place where students learn how to become human, you know, and how to recognize humanity in others. That's why we teach arts and humanities. It's not just arts, it's also the humanities part. It's learning and teaching how to be better humans. So, yeah, I think that's important to keep in mind. Yeah. And sometimes we forget that, right? Cuz we have the task, we have the goal.
Well, and I like what you said, teaching humanity, because
Yeah.
people would always ask, like, "Oh, what do you teach?" And the teacher response was always like, "I teach students."
Mm.
Like it's not
Mm.
about a subject or content. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, I taught
Mm.
math to students, but it was like you're teaching people,
Yeah.
and they should be central to what you're doing and not so concerned about like
Yeah.
testing and stuff. But then, state guidelines, federal guidelines, you always do have to teach to a test because, you
Mhm.
know,
Right.
there's those things too. So,
Because the world is fucked up. Yeah.
exactly. Yes, it is. It is, and I don't know when or if that's changing, but we still try to unfuck it as much as possible.
Mhm. Yeah, we try by bringing our own utensils and bowls to the events, and we we try by saying, my name is Grace.
Mm-hmm.
My pronouns are she, her, hers, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
those are the ways that we try.
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, so I remember going to your reading in LA. It was over in Santa Monica, I believe. And I remember getting your book,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not My White Savior.
Yes.
And we talked about this briefly, and I asked you like how you came up with this title, not My White Savior, right? I mean, come on, right?
Did I tell you the story behind the title? Because
I
it's not the original title.
that I know. I from my if my memory serves me correct, it came about with you and your agent having a discussion, right?
Well, do you remember what the original title was?
I actually don't. What was the original title?
So the original title is one of the poem titles,
Mm-hmm.
Fuck You, White Barbie. That was
Okay.
the original title.
Right.
When my publisher, Rarebird, said, hey, we're interested, let's talk,
Right.
let's pull together a contract. And so I was like, great. And um, and that title, actually, that poem, when I workshopped it with my class, the title of the poem was like Korean Barbie, you know.
Hmm.
And so after I was done workshopping the poem, my classmates and the instructor were like, I think you need a much stronger title, like something like "Fuck You, White Barbie." Everybody was crossing out the title Korean Barbie and writing "Fuck You,
Mm-hmm.
White Barbie" across the top. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was how that title for the poem came, and the title for the book. And my publisher was just like, "We really like that." And
Yeah.
then I was like, okay, well, are there any, legal reasons to not use this because, there's copyright and trademark and stuff. So
Right.
I thankfully I talked to an attorney and
Mm-hmm.
they said, you can do this, but it's a risk. And they could send you a cease and desist letter.
Mm-hmm.
Just think about what you really want to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it was probably um, better to choose a different title. And so that's
Sure.
why I ended up going with Not My White Savior. But even Not My White Savior, like there's no poem
Right.
called Not My White Savior. I don't even know if I use that phrase in a poem.
Yeah.
But I just started going through the titles and just kind of sharing that with friends and stuff and just, kind of
Mm-hmm.
brainstorming with people and
Mm-hmm.
coming up with like alternative titles. And
Yes.
literally, I still remember I was getting out of my car to go to an open mic, and for some reason, like Not My White Savior kind of came out of all of those brainstorming
Mm-hmm.
discussions with folks, and it just kind of stuck. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because like the whole white savior mentality
Yeah.
is very much present in adoption, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
transracial, intercountry, same race, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just white saviorism in general, even
Yeah.
outside of adoptions, is
Oh yeah.
a very real thing. I think especially that we probably talked about a lot in the last
Yeah.
year with the racial reckoning this country is trying to have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and it's in the poem from my mother, that I was told when I was growing up, excuse me, was that if I hadn't been adopted, I would have been either dead or living a life of prostitution on the streets of Korea, and it's like, I learned as an adult that from another adoptee who worked at h.o.t, the agency that I was adopted through, that is actually some of the rhetoric that h.o.t will tell,
Oh my
the
God.
agencies will tell the adoptive parents, the prospective adoptive parents, these things to kind of encourage them to adopt. Like, if you don't do this, then, and kind of almost that guilt mentality too, which I think is just kind of BS.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's like, well, wouldn't there have been, or, people say, well, if you hadn't been adopted, you would have grown up in an orphanage. It's like, well, wouldn't there have also been the option for just my family to have stayed together?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why wasn't that an option? And we don't,
Mm-hmm.
some of us don't know, but that should be an option and that should be the
Mm-hmm.
priority.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be one or the other. There could be many, possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
But, like to tell somebody, if we hadn't done this,
Mm-hmm.
you would have been this. Like, how do you know? That's so hypothetical.
Oh yeah.
And it's also, I think it's very, I don't know if it's shaming to the adoptee or just I think it kind of, for me, it shut down any option to feel any other way but grateful. And so then
Exactly.
when you do feel these other ways, in addition to gratefulness,
Right.
what do you do with that when you feel like those emotions are wrong?
Right.
But I also don't believe that there's any such thing as a wrong emotion.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
you can't help how you feel, but
Yes.
you can choose how to, you know, behave and respond in those emotions. But
Right.
I just remember thinking, like, that's not okay to tell somebody they can't be sad or angry, you know? I mean, if someone you love passes away, you don't tell them, oh, don't be sad, get over it. I mean, that's not right. That doesn't help. So,
It doesn't.
no.
Yeah, I remember, I do remember reading that poem, the one, it was for all three of your mothers, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
for your original mother, it was for your foster mother, and then your adoptive mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember those particular lines when she names the other potential options. In the alternate reality, like these would have been your only other options. And I remember you writing back, like, those are options here in America too, for me.
Yes.
Like, I
Yes.
could just as easily become a prostitute or, live on the streets. I mean, those are options anywhere, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just like, I loved that particular power, right? Like, because
Mm-hmm.
that is the voice of resistance. That is your agency stepping in. That's your assertion. That is corrective history as well, right? Lived
Mm-hmm.
experience as history. And, it's like impossible. It was impossible for me to read this without feeling just so emotional throughout, because it's very raw. It's
Mm-hmm.
extremely like just like right there, like just, like as if my skin had just been peeled off and like I just have my whatever bareness right underneath. And I feel so vulnerable to, everything around me. But, I thought it was encapsulated so beautifully. And I feel like these kinds of books that have this refrain of activism embedded in there, I think that is immensely useful for other adoptees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, of course, it's also a choice for adoptees. It's part of their agency for them to decide to go and pursue the search for their original family, or
Mm-hmm.
to, just stay here and live with their adoptive family and never bring that stuff up, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a choice. But in your choice, in your choosing, you chose a book of poems that magnify your voice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't think people fully understand um, that feeling of helplessness when you're a child, right? And you're
Mm-hmm.
living in essentially what feels like a stranger's house, a stranger's
Mm-hmm.
home,
Mm-hmm.
and they continue to gaslight you, right? I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
a form of gaslighting, to say that you have
Mm-hmm.
no other option but gratitude. I mean,
Right.
my God. I mean, that is understandable for any marginalized identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women definitely
Mm-hmm.
understand that, right?
Right.
It's like,
Right. Yeah.
you should be so grateful that we let you work here, young lady. How dare
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
complain about your salary? What the fuck you talking about? You're getting paid less than men. Shut up, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And even most recently with the anti-Asian hate crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this mainstream white supremacist, it's not spoken, it's not said directly, but we all feel it.
Yep.
We Asian Americans being told to go stand at the back of the line because
Mm-hmm.
the slavery stuff is priority, right? It's like, no, black people's issues are priority. Asians, so you have nothing to complain about. You model minorities, go stand on the back of the line. How dare you speak up? I mean, that wasn't said per se, but I felt it. All my Asian American
Mm.
friends felt it. But that mentality, to say that there is a hierarchy or priority when it comes to specific categories of racialized groups in America, that is them gaslighting us to say, be quiet, this and that. When what we should be saying is, all of us, whenever we stand for Black Lives Matter, when we stand for Stop Asian Hate and Stop AAP Hate, we're all standing for the same thing, which is we're standing up against white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't white people understand that these movements are about them?
Mm-hmm.
They keep thinking it's about us,
Mm-hmm.
making it about us, when we're making it about them. And
Right.
that's the disconnect that drives me insane.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I hear what you're saying and have had a range of thoughts and emotions over the last year, and at the same
Yeah.
time, I do want to recognize that like the only people in this country who have ever been qual I don't know the right way to say this, but who have been considered less than a full person are
Mm.
Black people.
Mm.
Few years ago, I guess I can attribute this to my then employer
Mm-hmm.
eliminating my job. I had some time to, travel, so I went to New Orleans and I went to the Whitney plantation, which
Right.
at the time was the only, I don't know if it still is the only plantation to actually tell the story of slavery from the perspective of enslaved people and
Mm-hmm.
having invested, a lot of resources into preserving the history and telling the history.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it just I was like, wow, this is the education that, I feel like I'm constantly, when we're talking about teaching, I feel like I'm constantly having to teach myself the real history of this country
Yeah.
because we didn't get it in high school or college. And
Right.
so I felt like that experience, um, yeah, I learned so much. I would go back again and just, really trying to understand like what it was like on the day to day
Yeah.
and then also to see what you know what his like when you're talking about like you said corrective history, and just preserving history and accurate history because
Mm-hmm.
our history classes are if they're leaving
Whitewashed.
certain things out, yeah, they're not they're not accurate, they're inaccurate. Not to say what they're sharing is inaccurate, but if you're leaving pieces
Mm-hmm.
out, then well, the whole of it is
Mm-hmm.
inaccurate. Like I never learned about the Japanese internment camps. I never learned about
It's
that in school.
ridiculous.
I
Yeah.
remember when I was teaching, and somebody was talking about the movie Snow Falling on Cedars, and
Yeah.
they said, "Oh, it's about the internment camps," and I was like, "What in the heck is this?" So that's how
Mm.
I learned. I
Good
mean,
God.
great Hollywood, you
Right.
know. So, I mean, I guess those are other documentations of history
A
that
lot of that goes overlooked. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
And I completely agree with you that black bodies were the bodies that were dislocated and
Hmm.
then forced into slavery through white white people, right?
Hmm.
Um, and because of that history, because of the enslavement of black bodies in America, because that was the foundation of America,
Hmm.
um, any person of color in America became like it was just like oh like they're just as they could just as easily be dehumanized, right?
Right, we're
Because
all
they had that
disposable.
precedent. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and Native Americans and indigenous,
Mm-hmm.
communities,
Mexicans,
and
you know, yeah.
yeah.
That's another thing that Americans don't fucking realize. America committed 3 genocides, right? It was the Native Americans, and then black bodies, and Mexicans.
Hmm.
Like we wouldn't have Texas, we wouldn't have California, we wouldn't have. I mean, this whole notion of the frontier, right? Like when
Hmm.
people use this term frontier and they think it's like a great term, it's a powerful term. I'm like, do you know where the word fucking frontier comes from? It comes from colonization. It comes from taking land that doesn't belong to you. It comes from killing people who belonged there, whose land that belonged to. Um, so yeah, like Americans, you're right. We're very, how do I say, our educational system does let us down, let us all down. It's a huge problem, even in college. And I'm teaching undergraduate students, and I integrate so much from my day to day lived life. Things that I pick up just from attending an event, things that I pick up from you know talking to people like you, people just
Hmm.
around me who are activists. That it's like those kinds of things get integrated just by choice because I know that the textbooks that we have that are, at our disposal are just not enough.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Yep.
yeah, like again, even the word, instead of saying um, riot, saying rebellion or uprising. I mean, that's something
Hmm.
I learned as a graduate student,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, our fucking educators really, our educational institutions really need to reprioritize some things. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and even just I think in the wake of the shootings in Atlanta, and just well, is it a hate crime or is it not? And it's like my initial response was, if it feels like a hate crime, it's a hate crime. And just all the education that people were doing around Asian American history, because a lot of people don't think that we've ever experienced any, problems, and that we don't experience racism or whatever,
Right.
and don't even know who Vincent Chin was. But
Yeah.
I think, like for myself, I never got to take Asian American studies in college or graduate
Right.
school, or ethnic studies. That it
Yeah.
wasn't, the schools I went to didn't have those
Yeah.
opportunities. And so again, I've taught myself a lot of those things. But I think, if people don't understand the history, and
Yes.
even, people think, let's go back to the whole adoption theme again, is that
Yeah.
I think there are definitely white families who've adopted children of color who think that because they adopted a child of color that they can't be racist. And it's like,
Yep.
well, actually,
Yep.
I was a target of racism in my own
Mm-hmm.
family. My parents,
Mm-hmm.
aren't, I can't, I mean, everybody's got their own biases, right? No matter
Right.
what your background is.
Yes.
And
Always.
so I think that, for someone to say, like, well, I can't be racist because I adopted this child of color, it's like, well,
Right.
you've got definitely some racial blind spots.
Yes.
I've been watching This Is Us quite a bit lately, and it's like some of it really resonates with me, some of it not as much. But I think it's
Sure.
really interesting how they have woven in the whole identity of what's his name, Randall, as a transracial adoptee, as a black man,
Mm.
especially in this time, and making things very relevant. And like, yeah, he's what, in the show, he's probably, I guess, in his 40s, and
Mm-hmm.
because he hasn't talked about some of these things in the past, it's it's like he's dealing with the trauma now. And if you don't
Yeah.
talk about it, it'll come out in very ugly ways. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, a little bit
It
of a
always comes
tangent there,
out.
but yes, I have been watching
No.
that show quite a bit lately,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting. So,
Yeah. It does come out. It comes out eventually, you know?
mm-hmm,
Like, I look at right now, I'm looking at Mia Farrow, and, I'm just always shaking my head because when it comes to Mia Farrow and the whole Sunni Previn stuff, I'm just like, I'm not team Mia Farrow nor team Woody Allen. I am team Sunni Previn. All right? I am team Sunni Previn all the fucking way. I don't care about Mia Farrow. I don't care about Woody Allen. I care
mm-hmm,
about Sunni Previn and what she did as a grown woman to go and get agency because she grew up in an abusive family. She grew up with a woman who was a child collector. And, like the way that the Pharaoh empire,
mm-hmm,
it's a fucking empire. Like Ronan Farrow is a very powerful journalist and he has a lot of stakes at HBO. That's why they have that fucking um docu-series, right? And it's like, why is Mia Farrow and the Pharaohs, like, why are they so hell-bent on incriminating Woody Allen right now? And I was just like, is it to hide something? Is it
mm,
to make a louder noise to distract from the fact that she made some big fuck ups when it came to adopting children from other countries that are non white? And I would say yes. Like
mm-hmm,
Mia Farrow's Asian American son, right? He wrote it on like Blogspot. It's like not at
mm-hmm,
all. It doesn't have the power of the Ronan Farrow
mm,
platform.
mm-hmm,
But he wrote it. He said that he looked up to his older sister Suni, and
mm-hmm,
that Suni suffered a lot at the hands of Mia Farrow, who was abusive,
mm,
and that nobody in their family could ever speak up against Mia because she would make their lives a living hell. So these adopted children lived in fear.
mm-hmm,
They had no control. They had no say. Anything
yeah,
Mia Farrow said, that was the go. Okay?
right,
And it's unfortunate. It's horrifying that a child like Dylan Farrow is in the middle of basically like a fight between, like Mia Farrow and Woody Allen, essentially. Not only
mm-hmm,
is Dylan Farrow a victim, but I would say Suni Previn is also a victim. She was a victim of the media at the time. She was a victim of racism, So I am Team Suni Previn all the way to the day I die. I want to get her face tattooed on my arm. That's how much I am Team Suni Previn. Like, I don't care about Mia Farrow. I don't care about Woody Allen. I don't care. I do have a lot of pain, like empathetic pain for Dylan Farrow, and I have a lot of empathetic pain for Suni Previn. So that's my position on that.
Well, and the interesting thing is too is that that is probably not, well, it's not an isolated incident, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like what you said too about child collector because there are plenty of child collectors, whether they're celebrities or not.
Yeah, everywhere.
Um, but also just how many adopted children have died in their own homes or at the
Mm.
hands of their adopters. And, you know, it's, I don't know when it will end, maybe when adoption ends.
Mm-hmm.
But a poet friend of mine, I want to talk about their book. I've seen a few of the poems from it, but and MJ is not an adoptee, so I'm really really curious to read the whole book
Mm-hmm.
when it comes out. But um, their working manuscript is called Bluff, Bluff.
Mm-hmm.
This is what they wrote on Twitter. Bluff is my working manuscript about the Hart family murder suicide and the events leading up to it, persona and documentary poetics. I can't wait to spend the next year working on this one. And I've read, like I said, a few of the poems that they've had published.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I know I'm going to read this book and buy it, but
Yeah.
also it's just intriguing to me to have a person who is not adopted
Yeah.
write about this experience,
Yeah.
especially um, in persona poems as part of
Yes.
the manuscript, because I feel like those are persona poems they can go so many different ways, but I think they can
Right.
also, for myself at least, they can be kind of traumatizing,
Oh yeah.
And so I think it will be really interesting to read the final um, manuscript. So anyway, if anybody is interested, Michael M.J. Jones on social media, and again, I don't know when the book will come out, but
Mm-hmm.
the manuscript Bluff is in process, and um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I know other folks who have written about the Hart family who aren't adopted because it hit other nerves,
Oh my god. Yeah.
and the two poets, MJ and then this other poet I'm thinking of, they're both black, so I think it
Yeah.
because there's that identity, it doesn't matter if you're adopted or not, like you still feel this, you know, there's something there that resonates that
Yeah.
calls a poet to voice something about it.
Mm-hmm.
So yes,
Yeah.
I think the manuscript, I think the book will be something that I will probably prepare myself emotionally and psychologically to
Oh
read.
my god. Yeah.
It won't be one of those books that I just sit down and want to read,
Yeah. Yeah. With a
in
cup
one
of
afternoon.
coffee.
But who knows? Maybe it will be because I know it will be very good.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that situation, that those children died like right um I think it was 2018, spring of
Mm-hmm. It's recent.
2018.
Yeah.
And you know
It was horrible.
again,
That event was so horrible.
yeah, and again, people think that adoption is just this great thing, and that, well, that was just one case. It's like, well, actually there have
No.
been many
There's
cases.
so many
There have
cases.
been
There's
many
so many.
cases, and
Yeah.
some of them are probably just not reported in
They
the
go
news.
underreported.
you know
Yes.
so
Because of a
um
sense of shame,
mhm,
like because sexual abuse is huge, when it comes
mhm,
to adoptees and children. Like so many of them, like so many stories of sexual abuse are there, and people
mhm,
just overlook it. And then people, I mean, that's also another line in your book saying, well, all said and done, they should still be grateful, right?
mhm,
Like they should still
mhm,
be grateful for the life that was given to them.
mhm,
And it's just like, man, a lot of kids can just do without sexual trauma and racialized trauma and
mhm.
just general abuse. They could just do without that stuff, really.
I think everyone, and I
Yeah.
think just as an analogy, I mean, like, yes, being told, like, well, just be grateful, and especially when you're being told that by somebody who's in a position of power, and
Mm-hmm.
leaving is very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But I would just, I would use as an analogy, just, like employment, you know, just because you have a job, if you're not being respected and
Right.
treated, you know, fairly and consistently with other employees, then why? Then that is also an abusive situation. And
Yes.
but again, it's hard to leave because you got to pay rent, you got to buy
You
groceries.
need money.
It's like, and the longer, if so. Anyway, I think about that as an analogy. It's like
Yeah.
nobody wants to stay in a bad job, but
Sure.
sometimes we do.
Yeah.
It takes longer to get out than maybe you want,
Yeah.
but if you're in an abusive situation in your
Yeah.
home,
Yeah.
leaving, especially if you are the child, leaving
Right.
is got to be horrifying and
Yeah.
terrifying, and even telling somebody who can do something about it is,
Right.
because even as an employee, you go back to the employee situation, how many people will actually say something and speak up at work if something isn't right because people are afraid of retaliation.
Exactly.
I've spent part of my time in HR, and somebody shared something with me, and I said, I really think I need to take this to somebody else and bring it
Mhm.
forward, but would you be okay with that? And they said,
Mhm.
well, can you guarantee that I won't get fired?
Mm.
You know, and I want that assurance that I'm not going to be fired. I won't be, you know, I won't experience backlash. And so when I talked to these other individuals about it, and I said, I think something needs to be done. I made them. This is all, of course, on Zoom. I said, they're concerned. I said, I'm not going to share their name with you until we have this discussion about like that they won't get fired, and
Mhm.
that and they were doing exactly what you're doing right now. They're just like shaking their head in agreement. I said, no.
Right.
Can you tell me? I want to hear. I want to
Right.
witness you saying
Give
they
me
will
a
not get
yes.
fired.
Yeah.
And so oh, okay. So they said no, they will not get fired. It's like, yeah, I'm not gonna
Mm.
out this person until you know I can have that assurance because I promised them that.
It's
And
like
it's
part of
real.
that.
You
Yeah.
know,
It's
worrying about your
systemic. It's
career.
structural. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
systemically and structurally built against us so that we can't speak up, you know? And
Right.
that is a great analogy, actually. Yeah.
And
Like
I've
a
been
child.
thinking
Yeah.
about just hierarchy in general a lot because I know a lot of, some people, they don't like, how, hierarchy and power, like how you flatten organizations and
Right.
not necessarily take that power away, but, maybe spread it around so that there
Share it.
isn't that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that structure, that power structure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I don't know how it works, like in the workplace, but it has to be possible somehow.
There are examples of that, you know?
hmm
I watched that Magic Dr. Bronner's Magic Soapbox documentary. Have you seen that film?
No, I haven't.
It's a lovely film. I mean, you know of the soap, I'm sure, though,
hmm
right?
hmm
I love this soap. So many people love this soap. It's a hippie
hmm
soap, but they have this policy where the CEO doesn't make more than 40 times what the lowest paid employee at their company makes.
Oh wow.
And
Oh
everything in excess of that goes to charities.
yeah. Do you know who? So this makes me think of Dan Price.
Uh huh.
He's a CEO of Grabby Payments in Seattle. So I
Yeah.
follow him on social media because
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he lowered his salary so that
Yes.
everybody in the company could make
Yes.
at least $70,000 a
Yes.
year. And
$75,000 a year. It's not even that much, but it makes a huge fucking difference.
right,
It makes a
and
livable difference. Yeah.
and even just the things he says on like LinkedIn and other social media platforms, just that
Yeah.
how if you leave an employer
Yeah.
and they are like, oh my gosh, you're leaving us high and dry. It's like, no, they should have like created a plan so that they were ready for people to move on,
Right.
and that it's not your responsibility to take care of all those things. Of course,
Yeah.
you want there to be a smooth transition and you
Mm.
leave on a professional and good note, but
Right.
that's not your problem. You don't have to,
Yeah.
take care of all of that. If they didn't, if you
Yeah.
gave them ample warning and if they didn't, listen and create a contingency plan.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I just like a lot of the things that he says about like trying to create some equality in the workplace
Yeah.
and just, respect for all employees no matter what their level is.
Exactly. Yeah, he's like one of those like woke white boys who like went and did ayahuasca somewhere and came back enlightened, and he's like, okay, this is what I need to do. And it's like, yeah, go, you do whatever it is that you need to do in order to become a better person, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, sometimes, a lot of the times, usually the reason why people act like assholes is because they have a chip on their shoulder. It's because they're sad, their needs were not met,
Mm.
they've been abused or traumatized or suffered something horrible, and they're going to go out and be a blatant asshole. Like, if you look at these very vocal, radicalized right wing people who happen to be of working class or lower middle class or middle class, what I hear when they're being very vocally and actively racist or hateful, what I hear is their own, like somebody who abused them, like somebody
Mm.
who lashed out on them and said, why are you being such an ignorant hick? That's like what ignorant hicks say, to say,
Mm.
like, this kind of misogynistic thing or this kind of racist thing, when they were not in any way intending to be that particular category, right? And this is where the debate around intention for me becomes complicated, because, like, up until very recently, I used to believe that intention did not matter,
Mm.
right? I used to really genuinely believe that. I used to say, like, when somebody like made a mistake and like they said something that was like hateful towards, one of my identities, I would be like, man, that is fucked up. You're so ignorant. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't my intention. I was like, your intention does not matter. It's like, let's say you're backing out of a driveway and you hit somebody. You
Mm-hmm.
didn't intend to hit somebody, but you still hit them, did you not? And they're like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my god, I'm so fucking sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, that's not the way. That's not the progressive way at all. That's not the humane way. Intention does matter. It does
Mm-hmm.
matter, and then we have to be very, very like alert and mindful and see what is happening from many different perspectives. Okay, yeah, what this person said might have caused me injury. So out of my injury, I may be reacting out of my ego, because the ego is there to defend me. It's my protector. And
Mm-hmm.
I lash out and say, you racist piece of shit. I could say that, or I could say, oh, okay, you probably didn't mean to, but I felt a little hurt when you used the word, I don't know, like Oriental just now to
Mm-hmm.
describe me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because, of anything. It's not because you intended it. I don't think you intended to hurt me, because we're friends or we know each other. It's just that that term is now tainted with
Mm-hmm.
very negative connotations, and it's just not the. I mean, as fucking Walter says in The Big Lebowski, like, it's not the preferred nomenclature, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
Asian American, please, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, so yeah, that becomes a teaching moment, right? But not
Mm-hmm.
even. I don't even want to say teaching moment, because you just mentioned hierarchy. Like, I am not above anybody
Mm-hmm.
because I learned something. I'm
Right.
not. We are all equals. I just happen to have had the resources and the time and the privilege to have access these institutions and get the degree and get the knowledge. This
Mm-hmm.
person and I we're still people.
Right.
um, I need to acknowledge this person's intention, and then I need to approach them in a way that does not make them feel defensive and hurt,
Right.
because two wrongs don't make a right, right? This
Mm-hmm.
person made a mistake. Let's just learn it and understand it as a mistake and recognize it as a mistake, and then just speak my truth from my heart and say, oh, that was a little bit hurtful. I don't think you meant it, but this is what I prefer. And let's say you have that communication, right? I
Mm-hmm.
really doubt that a person who is a human being, who has good intention, who is genuinely good, I doubt that that person is going to go around using that word Oriental again, in a hateful way. I really doubt it. The only way for them to use that word in a hateful way with intention to hurt others will be if I lashed out at them and said, you
Mm-hmm.
racist piece of shit, you're so fucking stupid. Nobody uses the word Oriental. What are you, from the 1950s? You're a moron.
Mm-hmm.
Da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
That will definitely send them flailing over to the other side.
Right.
Find others who make them feel understood and make them feel better, who will go and comfort them and say, you know what, you didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
That bitch
Right.
is fucking crazy. That stupid gook. You know? And that's how it happens. That is
Mm-hmm.
what's been happening.
Mm-hmm.
So Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think we on the left really need to be mindful of that, right? And I love
Hmm.
what you say about this, like this breaking down of hierarchy. You know, there's like one example that I could think of is it's in a Korean drama actually that I really like.
Of course, it's
It's
in a
called.
Korean drama.
I learned so much from K dramas. I mean, my God, it's like changing me all the time. But it's called Search WWW. A woman wrote it, and there's this startup company where their whole like company culture is to address one another in formal terms. So they
Oh.
don't use informal speech. They only everybody. It doesn't matter what your rank is. Everybody addresses one another in formal speech,
Hmm.
and they don't even have titles necessarily.
Hmm.
Right? I think that's important to not give titles. You're not a VP. You're not an executive. You're not a blah blah blah.
Hmm.
You know, you just have a name.
Hmm.
And everybody at the company, they all have English names, like anglicized names, and that's
Okay.
again, it gets a little dicey there because
Hmm.
like, why are you anglicizing your Korean names? But the reason why they do it is because in Korea, culturally, it's very rude to address one another by their names if you don't know them, if they're older than you. You know, there is Confucian systematized structural cultural things there. So they use
Hmm.
the English name because it becomes easier to like call them by their names if it's an anglicized name. So they all adopt anglicized names
Hmm.
at the company. And so those were some methods that I saw in a TV show. It was an imagined scenario. Maybe it's based on some realities that we live in, but I was just like, this kind of stuff is happening. It's happening with younger people, and it's happening with people who are trying to do better
Hmm.
and to not repeat the same mistakes that corporations have been
Hmm.
doing. So
Yeah.
I see hope in that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm, yeah. Um. Okay. So your book. Do you have another
Uh-huh.
book coming out?
Oh gosh. Well, that is always the recurring question that people ask. And so
Well, this must have been a hard. Well, let me ask you. How long did it take for you to come up with this collection?
I tell people 15 years because
Mm-hmm.
partly I never planned to write a book.
Yeah.
Um, I just, I started hearing poets like Balfi, Ed Buckley, and
Mm.
Nadia Ali. I was born with two tongues. I started hearing them and thinking,
Mm.
wow, this really resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like people who look like me who were not all necessarily adopted,
Right.
but that were saying, things that I felt, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, you know, casually started taking a couple of writing workshops, nothing serious, just like, oh, there's a community writing workshop, might be kind of
Right.
interesting.
Right.
But I never really, yeah, I didn't set out to be a poet or to be, an author.
Sure.
I didn't even start calling myself a poet until, well, I guess once I was going to write a book, then I had to, there was no kind
Yeah.
of going back there. But um, I remember when I moved from Minnesota to California, I just felt like there was something, something that was going to be an avenue for me to change the world in a way that I hadn't discovered yet. And I didn't know what that was. I had no idea what that was.
Mm.
And the first year I was in LA, I went to this social event, and it was social, it was networking. People were giving out their business cards and stuff. And I remember this one person, and hopefully I will find their business card again somewhere. Who knows where it is now? But they were a palm reader, or as she liked to say, a hand analyst. And she must have asked me to say something about myself, because then she looks at my hand and she's like, oh, you are going to be published. And I just was like,
Wow.
oh, ha ha ha. And I walked away and I was like, oh, she's not know anything. But
Right.
then there was always this kind of tug in the back of my
Of
mind, like, okay, well,
course.
maybe something's going to happen. I don't know. And
Yeah.
then I went to a seminar one week and I just, I was like, you know what, I'm going to write a book. And I didn't even know, I had no idea what the topic would be, what the genre would be. I was not, I just was like, I'm going to write a book, and I don't know what it's going to be about.
Mm.
So here we are with
Mm-hmm.
the book, and people do ask, like, what are your plans, going
Yeah.
forward? And
Yeah.
so I do think that I will write another book. At one
Yeah.
point, I thought it would come out 5 years after, you know, Not My White
Okay.
Savior, but that's
Yeah.
less than 2 years away.
Sure.
And so let's just say if anybody's thinking like, okay, no, it probably will not be out, and there probably will be more than 5 years between the two
Mm.
books, which is fine.
It
But
is.
yeah, I mean, I think
We all have our pace.
one of the things that I didn't really tackle in Not My White Savior as much as I think that I would like to is
Mm.
spiritual abuse. There are just
Oh.
other pieces that I didn't write that I think because they were so traumatizing, I just didn't even, it wasn't even on my radar. Like I kind of at one point had kind of made this mental list of like, here's different topics I want to make sure are covered in the book. And
Sure.
there were some things that I was so traumatized by that I didn't even write about them. But I think the spiritual abuse piece can happen to anyone, whether you're adopted or not. But I think the intersection of it with adoption is unique. Just the whole
Yes.
narrative. Like if we hadn't, we're the white saviors.
Exactly.
But just also spiritual abuse in general. That being told like, well, I can tell you haven't read your Bible lately. It's like, really?
Oh God. Yeah.
How do you know? How do you know?
Yeah. I mean,
Or
isn't it a crime? I mean, isn't it a crying shame that spirituality is used as a weapon
mm-hmm,
when it comes to white Christianity, unfortunately, you know?
mm-hmm. Well,
It's
and
so sad.
there was a movie that came out several years ago. I believe it was like 2003 or 2004 called Saved. It's
Mhm.
probably more like a B movie.
Mhm.
Macaulay Culkin is in it. I think he's in
Nice.
Moore also. And I knew it was about like the church and stuff, but I didn't know quite exactly what it was. And so I went to see it with a friend. And the
Mhm.
setting for the film is in a Christian school. Well, I went to a
Mm.
Christian school, so I was like, oh my gosh. I told my friends, I said, if you want to get to know me better, watch this movie because much of this is my experience growing up in the
Mm.
church, going to Christian schools. And there's
Yeah.
one scene in there in particular that I remember where, there was the really kind of like, you know, high on my horse, kind of like up on my pedestal kind of Christian student, and then the other one who was, trying to do all the right things, but also kind of open, maybe more like open minded.
Right.
And the one who was a little more judgy, like literally took the Bible and threw
Mhm.
it at the other girl. And I think the B word was exchanged somewhere in there. And then the one who was more open minded, she said, it's not a weapon. But you're right. People do use like spirituality and scripture, I think,
It's
in a very
weaponized.
weaponized way, which is sad and
It's
why
so sad.
I don't go to church right now because I I don't need to get up early on a Sunday morning or any I don't need to leave the house and go
Mhm.
somewhere where know I'm going to feel bad, just be made to feel bad. Like, where it's not a supportive environment.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me a little bit of like bipolar. I mean, not bipolar. Like borderline personality disorder.
Mm,
Because a borderline personality disorder will make the person that they love miserable and do everything. All of their actions say like, oh, it's like driving that person away. All of their actions
right,
are like gonna drive that person away, but then they're like, you know, they'll say verbally like, I love you, don't leave me,
right.
but it's like, but you're actually like, you're hitting me, you're throwing shit at me,
Yes.
you're spitting
It's
on
a
me, like,
it's a very much a push pull, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very confusing, chaotic thing, and the only reason why I think it gets that way, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with Christianity. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's because the people get involved and they turn it into a dogma, and then
Yes.
they, try to enforce rigid rules onto controlling
Mm-hmm.
people. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
where it gets problematic when spirituality should be about liberation,
Mm-hmm.
feeling
Mm-hmm.
like, less suffering, like less human suffering. I mean, that is the goal of all spirituality, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
and whereas Christianity has elements of that, when it gets dogmatized, it just becomes unbearable.
Mm-hmm.
I understand this trauma that you have. It's part of the reason why I don't go to church anymore either.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I found a lot of comfort in Buddhism, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's sort of been my thing. as part of my
Yeah.
journey these days. But
Mhm.
yeah, I can't wait to hear, or read your next book. Do you have like a writing ritual?
No, no.
No, huh?
I mean, I know people who, they write every day. They have like this practice,
Mm-hmm.
and I've taken several virtual workshops over the last year, with which
Nice.
I think, had the pandemic not happened, I wouldn't have been able to, learn from some of the people that I have
Yeah.
had that opportunity. So that is definitely a
Yeah.
plus. But I don't have a practice. I keep telling myself I'm going to create one, but it hasn't happened. So, I think sometimes I write when,
Yeah.
there's a lot inside and that's my
Mm-hmm.
outlet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I get that question a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't, I know some very talented writers that will also tell me, like, yeah, I don't write every day. I read every day. I definitely
Mm-hmm.
read every day. And
Yeah.
reading something on paper, I think, is important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bosia, he's another poet. Um, he has encouraged me to like read something on paper, because we're on the screen so
Mm-hmm.
much, and then reading something on paper. Like, I think, you know, ebooks are interesting. I've
Mm-hmm.
never had an e-reader, and I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that, I think that a lot of people just like the idea of holding a book in your hand, the
Mm.
physical, actual paper book.
Yeah.
But yes, I think reading things on paper is still very important.
I think it's lovely, yeah. It's like it's nice to have something tangible in your hand and then flip
Hmm.
the pages and just kind of like yeah, engage with the book. It's like
Hmm.
this physical connection that you can have with the book. I think that's important for sure. But yeah, I love what you say about reading every day. I
Hmm.
I think people forget that it's impossible to be a writer if you do not read.
Hmm.
It's like it comes hand in hand. You
Hmm.
gotta read if you want to write. Like
Hmm.
you can't just fucking go to a cafe somewhere and smoke a cigarette and just write a fucking masterpiece. It doesn't work that way. And
Right.
writing is also like I love the fact that you do workshops. Writing is not a
Hmm.
solitary act. That's another
Right.
BS concept. Like
Hmm.
it's no, no. Writers have to interact socially. Writers
Hmm.
always talk to other writers and ask, and like workshop process is so important. Going to
Hmm.
open mics as a poet, that's so
Hmm.
important. I
Hmm.
do that in comedy.
Hmm.
Um, all of this is always a collective effort, right? Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Exactly.
I love that you highlight those things.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I miss, I think, I mean, I know there's plenty of, virtual open mics, and I've had, a few virtual readings in the last year.
Sure.
But I think one of the things that I've said to other people, and they would agree, one of the things I miss the most about going to a bookstore or a venue for a reading, I mean, of course, the poetry and what you hear is so important, but it's all the other things that are in that
Yes.
environment, meeting
Yes.
new people, or
Yeah.
randomly running into poets that you
Yeah.
usually only see at those readings, or just
Yeah.
finding that random bar to hang out at
Mhm.
afterwards. And,
Mhm.
I mean, because to me, those are such important parts of,
Yeah.
you know, learning from others. and
Yeah.
and I just, yeah, I really miss those pieces, and I don't know when we're going to get that back. But
Yeah.
soon,
No,
hopefully. I don't know.
it's coming back. It's slowly coming back. Yeah, that's like it's like the reading is just the hearth, right? Or the
Right.
location is the hearth.
Right.
And it's like yeah, you're so right. It is about like the whole human interaction and the social interaction. Like that's what it's about. That's what gives us life. That's what gives us
Mm-hmm.
energy
Mm-hmm.
and rejuvenation and a sense of community when we go to those spaces and then we see the people that we know and we get to like just exchange a few words and check in with one another. Like that's huge. That was a huge part of like my day-to-day too. And yeah, to have that take, it sucks, but
Mm-hmm.
it's coming back slowly and good. So I have one final question, then we'll wrap
Sure.
up. But when you go to these open mics as a poet and you read, like, what is it that you're looking for? Like, are you looking for a reaction? Are you just trying to read it out loud so you could kind of hear the music of the rhythm and sound it out? Is that the point? Like, what are some of the goals that you have, or some of the benefits of an open mic reading as a poet?
I think there's a couple of things for me, and it's kind of changes over time. And I honestly, I don't think I've done, I don't know, like the open mics that I've read at in the last years when I was asked to, be one of the, readers. And so I think an open mic that's virtual where you actually have to sign up, that's a little bit different. So I haven't done that as much. But I think one is just I did not feel that reading or performing a poem was my strength. So I felt like I needed to do it to get comfortable with my voice, so that I don't sound just monotone or something, And so I really had to work on that. And I think, I was in choir when I was in high school. And so, like, kind of pulling out some of that as well. But, like, there is a musicality to reading a poem, I think.
Yes.
So there's that, but also, I think the open mic where I actually found out about how to write my book. I'd been taking some writing workshops in East LA, and it was some pretty deep personal stuff. And it's actually the Fucky White Barbie came out of those workshops. It's at Avenue 50.
And of course, it's from East LA.
Yeah, it's from Avenue 50. And so I, I went to this open mic once and I was like, okay, it's cool. Somebody had invited me. And so then I went again. I was like, I want to read some of this out loud because I felt like, writing for me is very therapeutic, but then to read it and share it with an audience who, I don't really care if they like it or not, but if one person would say, hey, that was great, or get some support, because I seek out open mic spaces where I know, like, the audience will be supportive no matter what you do, in some way. They'll encourage you in some way. And so for me, that was part of, like, I just want some reassurance that what I'm saying and what I'm writing it makes sense, and that it's, I wanted some validation, I think, as well. And I honestly don't even remember exactly which piece I read that night. It might have been the one about my name. And so, yeah, but also sometimes, you go to these open mics, especially in LA. I haven't experienced it as much here in the Bay Area, but I think it's just a different vibe up here too. But in LA, some of those open mics, if you don't get there in time, you do not get on the list. And I lived in Long Beach, so for me to haul from Long Beach up to LA, at least 30 to 45 minutes, depending on traffic, and then not get on the list,
Sucks.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's like sometimes I would go to open mics and not sign up because, that takes some energy to, like, okay, you got to prepare a piece, you got to make sure you don't, go over their time limit. But I think sometimes just going to an open mic and supporting other people and hearing what they have to say, and you can be so inspired by so much of what you hear, and I think, the whole poetry open mic scene is such an interesting community, at least the open mics that I've gone to, that I think to go only for yourself that's not what I want. I want to go and support others as well, and it's always interesting to go because I feel like no matter what frame of mind I'm in, no matter how I'm participating or attending, I always take something away from it. I feel like my soul is always fed in some way. And I take this back to, some open mics that I went to in Minnesota. And there's one series at the Loft, which is a literary center in Minneapolis. It's called Equilibrium, and it always has featured, for more than 10 years now, has featured writers of color, mostly poets. And, I would go because I knew that I would come away feeling better. And it was a very spiritual experience for me. And it's almost like, I don't go to church, but I go to these poetry readings. And that to me is better than church,
Yeah.
And I think, somebody will, if there's something, there's always somebody who's writing about the current times, And so if there's something happening where I'm, like, struggling to make sense of it, I feel like there will always be some anybody who has the courage to write about it in a way that kind of like grounds me, to know that I can also try and make sense of the spectrum of emotions and thoughts that I'm having. So I would just say to anybody who's never been to an open mic, you don't know what you're missing, go and try it and just listen and just take it in. You never know.
I think that's such an important lesson, for a lot of people. It's like sometimes when we're stuck in our own bullshit, we feel victim to it.
Right.
And we feel trapped. And if we listen to a neighbor or a friend about their problems or their current process of whatever, it's like that you get uplift from that, because you realize you're not alone in your suffering.
Yeah.
Everybody has their baggage and everybody's living through it, getting through it. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, people forget that being a good listener, taking the time to listen, is immensely cathartic and healing for the self. I mean, that's a lesson that all comics need to learn, because when we go to open mics, girl, we don't listen to anybody. We're just like, when do we get our stage time? Huh? We're all waiting. Why is this idiot up here talking about bullshit I don't care about? Like, we need to listen to one another. We need to be better listeners, and that's definitely been a goal of mine the last few years. I'm still struggling through. I'm still learning how to do it better, but thank you for that reminder. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think listening is so powerful, and to be listened to is so powerful. And shortly after was the week of the shootings in Atlanta, and I was like, it's like trying to work every day, but very upset about, what happened, but then also how it was being reported and so on. And at my job, we had a virtual lunch every Friday, and it was very casual, just like drop in if you want. Sometimes there was a topic, sometimes there wasn't. And I was like, I want to talk about this, and I feel like we need to talk about it at work. And so I connected really quick with another Asian American employee, and I just said, hey, what do you think about this? If I just put something out on our Slack channel about like, hey, we want to come together and center the voices of Asian American women. What do you think? I said, even if you and I are the only ones that show up, I said, to me, that would be worth it. And they were like, yeah, let's do it. And so we actually had, I think this is a small company, but a third of the team was there. And it was very well received. And again, I just emphasize to folks, showing up and listening to us today is hugely meaningful. Like, you don't have to say anything today, because like, there were folks that showed up that were Asian American, there were folks that weren't Asian American that were there, and I just said, I just appreciate that people showed up, because to me, that's like, your presence is solidarity. And obviously there's more than physically being in a space and listening, but I feel like that is a huge step, just knowing that, like, oh, people cared what I had to say, and people like, to me, that's so validating. Like, oh, you think that this is important enough to take time that you're instead of just eating lunch at your computer, you're going to tune in and listen to what we have to say. And I think one of the things that also came through, and even now, but I mean, especially like in that week and the time after, it's like seeing the solidarity for like other folks, speaking up as well, not just Asian Americans speaking up, but and what I saw, at least in my timelines and my feed, was overwhelmingly seeing Black women like showing up in solidarity and saying, how, to stand with us. And I just, it wasn't surprising to me, but it was just really beautiful to see that. And I hope that I can, be as good of an ally when it comes to, issues for the Black community. But I just, I think that, the interesting time that we're in with this country trying to have, and I say trying to have, a racial reckoning, because I don't really know that everybody's really doing it, but I mean, when we look at like the murder of George Floyd, the Atlanta
Mm-hmm.
killings, and just all the mass, killings that we're having, um, and I think it is a time for us to really come together and recognize where maybe, you know, as an Asian American, maybe where I haven't, and
Mm-hmm.
how to correct that. But um, yeah, I mean, I've had to take a step back and learn and continue to. I think it's one of those things where you can't just say like, oh, I'm an ally, and then that's it. Like it's something you have to keep working at. And I think the best definition of an ally, a friend of mine gave me, several years ago, is that I can say I'm an ally, but I think the true definition is when the group that I'm trying to support, when they say that I'm an ally, because I'm
Mm.
probably messing things up, and even if, a few people from the group say, yes, you're an ally, there might be others that say, no, she's not, because
Mm-hmm.
what she said and did, and so just
Mm-hmm.
always trying to, instead of spending energy calling myself an ally, like what am I really doing to be
Mm.
anti-racist and to be an advocate? And
Right. Right.
and that would be my question to many of those employers and organizations last summer that came out with their statements of solidarity. It's like, okay, what
Exactly.
have you done since then? It's
Yeah.
been almost a year, and what have you done since then?
Right.
It's
Show us the
not just,
goods.
yeah, solidarity is not an event, it's a journey,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a
Mm-hmm.
transformation,
Mm-hmm.
individual, I think, as well as organizational.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
So, yeah,
I couldn't have said it any better. Yeah. Um it's not about the title. It's about your actions. And
exactly.
it's about yeah, like, how honest are you with yourself?
Mm.
Yeah. All of those
That's a good
things.
one. How honest are you with yourself? And I think
Yeah.
also, I've heard people say, well, I don't know what to do. And it's like, well, at least you're asking that question. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that there's any action that's too small. I think that there has to be, it isn't just we're going to change overnight. It is
Right.
incremental change. One employer that I worked at, we actually looked at, I think it was like directors on up, and we looked at the demographics. And it's like, even if we filled every open position with a person of color, it would have taken us like beyond my retirement to reach any sense of balance with the demographics. Otherwise, it would still be white dominated.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, no, this does not change overnight. One more
No.
thing I want to say
Yeah.
about the whole, like, just in all the discussion, the Asian American, community and
Mm-hmm.
everything, is that, again, not surprising, but just another cycle of disappointment, I think, is that oftentimes in the dialogue around the Asian American community and our identity is that I often hear people, and I was actually just in a session this week, people saying like, well, our parents and, our grandparents are like this, and how, and it's like, you're excluding an entire population of transracial, adopted Asian Americans. And that,
Mm-hmm.
I think, is a continual slight, whether it's intentional or not. But I also feel like at this point, there's no excuse for it, that people need to understand that, like, when you say things in a certain way, you are excluding people, and
Mm.
you have to, understand that there's a large majority of us, I think, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm guessing there's at least 250,000 transracial Asian adoptees in the US, probably more,
Mm-hmm.
that we grew up with white parents. And so we don't know what Asian culture and traditions are like. So,
Yes.
I think there's opportunity for us to think about how to speak more inclusively when we talk about the Asian American community. And also though, to look at how diverse we are. You
Yeah.
know, we are not a monolith, you know.
Not at all.
Yeah. So
A
anyway,
whole entire continent with many, many countries.
exactly.
Yeah. That's an important insight, so I appreciate that. Thank you. And yeah, and I loved the like I wrote about it in my dissertation. Like I'm finalizing my dissertation today actually.
Hmm.
And I wrote about that the ends of adoption, the UC Irvine
Oh.
symposium that we
Mhm.
had, like,
Mhm.
I think 4 years ago now,
Yeah, I
almost,
think it's about 4 years ago. Yeah.
at UC Irvine. Yeah. And like, I'll never ever forget that event because it was not just academic, it was one full of heart. It
Mm.
was one full of, just everybody's like pain,
Mhm.
just there.
Mhm.
And I'll never ever forget it because it's like it was impossible because you know how academics are. We just like try to keep it dry, try to keep, like, leave out all the sentiment, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
We do our best to keep cool. But
Right.
during that symposium, everybody was crying.
Right.
Everybody.
Right.
No, there wasn't a single person who did not emote, right? It
Mhm.
was just like impossible to get through that symposium without feeling emotional
Right.
because it has to do with like a very basic human need, which
Mhm.
is just some care, some love,
Mhm.
just some understanding, and how all of those things, those very basic things, just got so complicated out
Mhm.
of like war and
Mhm. Mhm.
colonization and
Right.
white savior mentality and white supremacy and all of those things. It's just like some very, very simple things like connection. It just got complicated out of all this bullshit.
Right.
And yeah, I was just like, like sometimes I'll even just think back to it. I'm just like, yeah, it just like it gets so emotional for me. It's
Mhm.
hard. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I love the work that you do, and not just, with your poetry, but your local activism, your day-to-day activism. And yeah, I mean, you keep doing you, you're like such a strong person. And yeah, every time I talk to you, I always like learn several things. I always have several massively enlightened takeaways. So thank you for that. And thank
Well,
you
thank
for taking
you.
the time with me today.
Absolutely. I mean, I've enjoyed our conversation. I've been taking notes too, different things that you said that I was like, I have to remember that. Corrective history and teaching humanity. I mean, yeah, it's always good to dialogue with, um, I think with people that we have some synergies, but also that maybe we come at things from different angles
Mm-hmm.
and learn from each other. So, yeah.
Always.
And
Always. And that
happy
is,
belated Earth Day, since we brought that up.
yeah.
I actually I went to an Earth Day fair yesterday, and they were handing stuff out in plastic, and I'm like, I was like, why? They're like, hi, would you like some carrots and celery? I was like, sure, but it's in plastic, like little plastic baggies of, and they're like, yeah, we know. And I'm like, so why are you here with your plastic baggies of carrots and celery? But I did take some because it's healthy food. But then again, I was like, why is there plastic at this Earth Day fair? I don't. I did not understand that at all. I feel actually a little hypocritical having taken the plastic baggies of veggies, but
But you know what? It's
I don't know.
hilarious. At the
Yeah,
very least, it's hilarious.
it
And
is.
we'll give him that. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my God.
It was funny though when they were like, yeah, we know. Like, yes,
We know and
next
it can't
year.
be helped.
Yeah, and maybe partly it's because of COVID. They don't want to just have a veggie bowl sitting out there, your veggie
I think
platter.
I think it's a big
But
proponent. Yeah.
yeah,
But
so
still,
yeah. I was like, wait, I thought today was Earth Day.
great way to celebrate the earth by killing the earth even more.
Yes, with the little plastic baggies of celery and carrots.
Oh my God. All
Yeah.
right. It's great talking to you, Julayne.
Yeah, it's great talking with you too, Grace.
Next week, we're going to talk about one of my favorite Korean dramas of all time called Fated to Love You. I wanted to talk about this show right after discussing Successful Story of a Bright Girl, which I talked about on the episode with Ezra Blackrock. But, I wanted to celebrate AAPI Heritage Month, so I kind of put it in the back until next week. So we have a great guest for next week as well. And I'm really excited to talk about that show with you guys. So stay tuned for that. Watch the show if you want. It's on Viki, I believe. So check it out. It's a really, really good show. It's campy as hell. I mean, if you want to watch like the campiest show ever, this is like the camp level on this show is like 125. It's really, really high. So if you want to watch a show like that, this is the one, okay? Like it's like a psychedelic trip, honestly. So enjoy that one, and then we'll talk about it next week. Folks, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, I'm begging you, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Like, what is the deal? Why aren't people subscribing to my YouTube channel? Just do it, please, for the love of God, for fuck's sake. I am full on in the thick of writing my book right now, so send me your support emails, send me your questions, whatever you want to say it in an email. Send it to kdramaschool@gmail.com. Follow me on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at kdramaschool. You guys, it is such a pleasure being here every week with you all. It is a lot of fucking work. I will admit it's a lot of fucking work every single week. It's like I'm dreading the editing process because it's so time consuming. But I think about my listeners. I think about you all. And I think about how good I feel whenever I actually finish editing an episode and uploading it and then having it air live. So I think about those things, and that's what gets me through. So thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. And I will see you all next week.